Hi there, me again. Today we're going to have a look at an interesting little problem that I was posed on one of the courses I was running, and this was an Excel course. And this is how to produce drop-down menus where the content of the drop-down menu is determined by a previous drop-down menu. Now, normally I would do this with VBA code and just use a combo box and then fill it on the event of the previous one being filled. Or a previous one choice being made, I would then fill a second one. However, I can't use a VBA because of the server restrictions where it is running. It can't actually be stored on that server if it's got a macro or VBA on the workbook. So here's a few of the problems. I had to create the drop-down menus that change depending on the selection in a previous drop-down. So I want this drop-down, to be a different list dependent upon what people have chosen from this one. And of course, this one depends on this one. Can't use VBA. The list must be dynamic and drop-downs update if extra items are added. And what that means is if this list here, which obviously is generated from the list here, from the selection here, if somebody were to add into the list, this list should reflect the new add-in. So I can't just use a standard data validation and refer to a fixed range, because that range must be dynamic as a list. And the last one here, drop-downs should be selected in order. Now actually, let me just show you all of these things in turn. So the drop-downs that change depending on the previous drop-down. So if I choose drivetrain from here, I can now choose engine or transmission. If I choose bodywork from here, I now choose front, middle or rear. So you can see straight away that first one, the drop-down menus that change depending on a previous drop-down, that's been met. Can't use VBA. Well, I haven't. If I do Alt F11, there is no VBA in this project. Lists must be dynamic and drop-downs update if items are added. So we see here, if I choose there, drivetrain or bodywork, let's just have a look here. So drivetrain gives me engine or transmission, and these are created from here, engine or transmission. So if I just say tab and type in wheels, now when I go back to my selector, I've actually got wheels on it as well. So that one there works as well. And now we say the drop-downs must be selected in order. Well, if I haven't chosen anything in this drop-down, this one doesn't work, and likewise this one doesn't work. So I have to choose an option from here in order to be able to choose an option from here, and now this one works as well. So there's my example. Let's now have a look at how we can actually do that, and we'll build all of these individually, and it is using data validation, but there's some clever little code that we actually put in there. So the first thing to do is actually to get your lists sheet set up correctly. Now all of these lists, they are all actually tables in their own right. And here's another thing that you have to be especially careful of. So this one here, called drivetrain, is a table called drivetrain, and the header is also called drivetrain. Now what's important about this is that drivetrain is the option that appears on this drop-down. And now it needs to feed a table called drivetrain with a single column in it, and that column is header is drivetrain. And you'll see why later on. Now clearly here, that's a table called bodywork, and the same applies. So the table name is bodywork, and also the field name or the header for that table is bodywork. Likewise here, engine, engine, transmission, transmission. So you'll see why that has to be so later on. Okay, so the first two options are those two cells there. So if my first drop down is driven by those two cells, so that's easy enough to do. All I can do is I can say here this, and if I go to data validation, and I simply say I can allow a list, and the source is those two cells there. So it's gone to the other sheet, and I can type in B3, B4. So B3, B3, C3. So now if I click on my drop down, there's my initial list that's been created. Now, important to note here is I can add in extra options down here, but you must remember to extend that range going across if you do so. The other thing we could have done is we could have named a range, which was those two, and then simply referred to the named range. And actually here, if I show you the data validation, there's the range there, just the same as I've now referred to down here. Okay, so if I choose something in here, what I now want to do is have this one filled dependent upon what is in there. So if I go back to my list, drivetrain, I now want it filled with those three things. Now actually those three things are the contents of the field drivetrain within the table drivetrain. And if I look back here, that is the contents of the field which is called whatever that drop down has selected from the table, whatever that drop down has selected. So that's why I had to match those two things before, because I want to just refer to this cell each time. Now, there is a slight problem with this when we start to do it with the data validation. So let me just show you what that is. So if I just go into here and say data validation, and I'm going to say air list, and the source is going to be, now the code that we could write for this would be saying its source is drivetrain and brackets drivetrain. Now that would say it's the column drivetrain from within the table drivetrain. As soon as I click OK, it doesn't work. There's a problem with that formula. OK. In other words, it doesn't like it to appear like that. So I can say indirect. In other words, I don't want that field from within that table. I want the data that's in that field. That's effectively what indirect means. It's not exactly what it means, but it's effectively what it means in this case. So now if I click OK, and I'm missing something out there. I think I'm missing out some quotes there. What we're actually going to do is something slightly different anyway. So if you just see here, I'm going to go in to data validation, and rather than me typing in drivetrain, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say this here equals indirect. Open brackets. Now it's an indirect of whatever's in that cell there, and open quotes, square bracket, close quotes, and keep doing that. And that 7 there should be an ampersand as well. And the ampersand is the sign for concatenate. So I'm saying indirect of drivetrain and open brackets and drivetrain again and close square brackets and close the overall. And now I click OK, and this list here is now driven by whatever was in there. So if I change that to bodywork, this list here that gives me front, middle, rear. If I change it to drivetrain, this gives me the choice of engine, transmission, or wheels. Now because it's done that, because we're referring to a table, this is why the list is dynamic. So if I were to add something in to that table there, so if I click there, press tab, and type in something else now, so if I were to type in extras, that is now included. So if I go back here, I've now got extras in my list there. So you'll see how this answer people have put in there drives this. And we'll do exactly the same for the next one. We could copy and paste the validation across, but actually it's easier to do it from scratch. So if I say data validation, this is going to be a list, and it simply equals indirect, open brackets, and it's indirect of whatever's in there, and open square bracket, and whatever's in there, and close square bracket, close normal bracket, and the normal bracket is for the indirect part, and click OK. This one is now driven by this one, which in turn is driven by this one. So there we are. There we have it. They're all driven accordingly. Now what we can also do, a little extra here, is I can add in a column and I can put in, let's say, extras in here, and let's say radio sat nav. I'm just going to be cautious here that I'm not putting spaces in these previous ones, because these have to drive table names later on. So let's just say radio sat nav, and because we've put extras in here, you'll notice how we have drivetrain, parts drivetrain, bodywork, parts bodywork, and here we have an individual table for each item in here, and you'll notice obviously I'd have to add in wheels and extras here once I've added them in to the column there. So here, because I've added an entire column, what I actually need to do is come across here, and this now needs to read extras, and parts extras. What I now need is I need radio and sat nav. So I'd actually need radio, and again, as I say, you've got to be careful how you type this in. You've got to make sure that you don't actually put a space in one and not in the other, so you just need consistency. So what we could put in are various different options of radio that people could choose. So I've got a standard CD, I've got a CD changer, or standard radio. Sat nav could be full, UK or EU, and I click there. I simply do Control T, and this will turn it into a table, and I'm going to say the table has headers. I click OK, and straight away the header is radio, and what I want to do is make sure that is now called radio. This one here, I'll do the same, so Control T, our table has headers, and straight away click in here and rename it sat nav. And again, you've got to be extra careful that you match sat nav there with sat nav there, and also that matches whatever we'd put in here, the way that we've spelt and put in sat nav in there. Now I'm just clicking back there. This here is a table called bodywork. This here is actually now not the table called bodywork. We want that to be a table in its own right. Now the way that we have it at the moment, bodywork table actually is only that. So we need to do the same again as we did previously. So click in there, Control T to turn that section there into its own table. A table has headers, yes, and this is a table called extras. And again, you have to be slightly cautious, because what if I were to have another table here called extras? Well, you can't. So you might want to call that one extras sub-assembly. Extras. Entirely up to you how you do it. Let's see if that's actually working now. So we'll go back to the selector, click on there, and this first drop down hasn't been updated. So what we need to do is change this data validation, and click in here, and because I clicked in that box on the right, it automatically takes me to where that selection is made, and because it's on another sheet, that's particularly handy. So I click on there, it takes me to the sheet, and I can now click and drag across here, highlight all of that, click and drag across those three there. This now says it's on the sheet, selection drop downs, D3 to D3, D3 to D3, and I'm going to say OK. And now this drop down here has 3 items on it. Extras, that's the new one we added. Let's see if that works. Extras, radio or sat nav. Let's choose radio, and that gives us our different options for the radio. So there we have it. I hope that's been useful to you. I'm the Adobe Guy, and thank you for watching.